no matter your rank, no matter how long you served, I think that it is always going to be very difficult to replicate how it feels to be in the military.
What's going on, everybody, and welcome back to Never Left Behind, the podcast. We missed last week's episode due to our book release on 9/11, but we are back with some exciting shows coming up, including this one. This week, we are joined by Katie Crombe, who is an active duty lieutenant colonel in the United States Army. Katie shares stories about her deployments overseas, working as the aide to 4-star General Votel, growing up in a family of veterans, and important advice on veterans who are looking to transition. We are honored to have Katie on the show, and we hope you enjoy this episode as much as we do. Real stories, real heroes, for a real cause. This is Never Left Behind, the podcast. Katie, it's great to finally have you on. How are you this weekend?
I'm doing great, Bo. Great to see both of you guys after seeing you a couple of weeks ago.
I know. Dan and I were recently talking about how it was great to see you and your husband at the event in Ohio. For people listening, obviously just short, we released our book, The 20-Year War, at the National Veterans Memorial Museum. And Katie was kind enough to fly all the way from Florida with her husband to join us. And it was a great event. And we're excited to have you on our podcast this week.
Yeah, thanks so much. It was actually really inspirational. And the building itself just kind of reminded me that you are one of many after 250 years of a lot of wars in this country. So it was a great place to be.
And if you've never been, if it was your first time, it's pretty incredible the first time you step in and you see how big that building is and how much they have going on. So I'm hoping that you guys had a chance to kind of walk through it.
Yeah, we did. I mean, we walked in kind of right at dusk, so the sun was starting to set and you could see the ribbons that they had. And I guess that's the point of that when you're walking in. And so it's the ribbons that you have on your dress uniform. And so, that kind of took my breath away, to be honest. I mean, it was beautiful.
Yeah. Well, I don't think I've seen it like that before. When I went in a few times prior, I went in like in the morning or afternoon, and you didn't see like almost that stained glass effect that they have.
Right.
Yeah. And for people who don't know what we're talking about, you should absolutely just look it up. Just look up like Google images or something of the museum, because it's got some incredible architecture where it's almost like two overlapping rings. But they specifically designed it to where there's a rooftop space and there are different service ribbons that are like basically stained glass, looking like those service ribbons. And during dusk, the sun comes through that glass and projects the colors on the inside of the building. And it just looks incredible. Like it's so brilliantly made. Like that place is so cool. And I could spend, I've already spent a lot of time there, but I could spend a lot more.
Oh, absolutely. They need to get the word out on that museum. I mean, it's just everyone needs to go there.
They've only been there for 2.5 years, I think.
Yeah. So. Well, that was the unfortunate thing is they opened literally right before COVID. So it's like,
oh, right.
They opened and then they were starting to ramp up their programming, starting to get the word out there that, this place existed, and then COVID shut everything down. So they've done an excellent job of adjusting and being able to move a lot of things virtually. They have a lot of virtual programming. And honestly, if you talk to Bill Butler and General Ferreter, they will tell you that was actually kind of a blessing in disguise, because it forced them to do more national outreach, like not just focus on getting people in the museum, but getting people aware of the museum just all across the country.
Yeah, all online.
Yeah, it's been cool, and I hope a lot more people, are become aware of it and definitely make the trip to go visit. I think every veteran, anybody who's connected to military service, should absolutely visit it. Even civilians, if they just want to kind of have a better perspective of what it's like to serve and go through like the sequence of events of like initially enlisting, having that call to service, what it's like to serve, what it's like to serve in combat, and then what it's like to return from that. And it's got it through all eras of war.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
I also love how it's not in DC, right?
Yeah.
So it's in Columbus, Ohio. It's kind of in the, part of America in the Midwest where a lot of soldiers come from. So I think that's kind of cool. Like put it in the middle of a normal community rather than the nation's capital or something where you would assume it would be.
Well, and speaking on that, the first question and topic I want to get into is kind of where it all got started for you. And we recently found out, actually, my girlfriend told me, because you were telling her and her family first, but you grew up near Lake Erie, which obviously is one state over from Columbus, Ohio, and not far, about a 3-hour drive. What was that like for you growing up in that area? And how did that kind of start the idea of you wanting to commission in the Army?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm 5th generation Army.
Oh, wow.
But my dad retired. So we lived all over the country and then also in Germany for 4.5 years. And when we came back right before I entered high school, we came back to this little town called Fairview on Lake Erie, Pennsylvania. My dad's final assignment was as a commander of all the ROTC college units in Western Pennsylvania. And then he later went into academia and on and on. But so, I had come from being surrounded by kids like me. So everyone's parents were in the military, grown up on military bases, to this tiny town, 500 kids in my high school, almost completely white, 2 Indian Americans and 1 African American in my school.
Wow.
And I just remember walking in the first day and being like, what is this?
Holy white is going on.
They were all talking really slowly to me because they heard that I'd come from Germany and they thought I was an exchange student. I'm like, no, my parents are in the military, or my dad's in the military. I'm not German. And so right off the bat, I'm like, wow, this is just a completely different experience. And everyone kind of looked the same, talked the same, had the same upbringing. And the first year was actually quite a struggle for me, just to kind of get my head around the fact that, I don't want to say that people weren't open-minded, but it was just a different lens that they had looked through their whole life. Right. So when I went to college, 4 years later, applied to a bunch of colleges, and the one I chose, Lehigh University, was super expensive, still is. And my parents were like, listen, we'll help you pay for this, but we can't afford to pay for that whole thing. Why don't you apply for an ROTC scholarship? And this was in 99. So no 9/11, the military wasn't really in the news. They weren't doing much. I mean, obviously they were doing a lot of things in garrison and training, but no one was at war. And so my dad's like, you can go to college, be a news anchor woman. That's what I wanted to do at the time. And this will help you pay for school. You can be in the reserves. And I'm like, yeah, fine, whatever. Just get me to college with my friends, So went there. In the first couple of years, I was the absolute worst ROTC cadet on the planet. I mean, horrible. It just, I was more interested in school and partying, doing normal college stuff. And 9/11 hit when I was a junior. And all of a sudden it was like, holy crap, this is real. And so I started to kind of invest more time in it. And then that next summer you go to this kind of training camp for 6 weeks. I'm totally immersed in the Army. And I absolutely loved it. Like, I love the leadership aspect of it, the physical part, the camaraderie. And from there, I'm like, okay, this is the place I was supposed to be. It felt again like home. Like, these people look different. They, it was just a nice kind of inclusive environment, but everyone's from different backgrounds. And that just felt like home to me. And I'm like, all right, this is the right decision.
It's interesting because I'm a military brat too. My dad was in the Air Force for 21 years, also moved all over the place. And I would have told you, I would have never joined the military because I've witnessed, what my family went through.
Right.
As far as like constantly being relocated and having to make new friends and all that kind of stuff. Did you kind of have the same perspective where you're like, I don't want to do this, but you know what, if it's going to pay for college, then I'll make my way through it, but I'm not going to stick with this. This is just to pay for college.
Oh, for sure. I mean, you have to sign on the dotted line. You're going to stay in for 4 years. And I'm like, I will get out in 4 years in 1 hour. Right. I mean, that was my plan.
Yeah.
So for some reason, like, you get there and you're like, wow, something feels right about this. You didn't want it to feel right, but it did.
And I want to go back to obviously the area you grew up in. I'm sure you spent your summers on Presque Isle.
Oh, for sure. No, I absolutely love Erie, and it's a great place to grow up. Yeah. There is a beauty in the Midwest. I mean, it's just good people.
Did you ever go
Presque Isle is amazing.
Did you ever go to the ice cream place on Presque Isle that does it's almost like an orange, like creamsicle. It's like orange and vanilla.
Sarah's.
Yes.
Sarah's. Yeah.
So that
place is awesome.
I recently went there a couple of weeks ago when we were visiting Erie, and Dan and I, when we were first working on the book, The 20-Year War, we went to Presque Isle in the winter. That's the place with the lighthouse with the lake that was completely frozen over.
Yep.
So we got to see it for the first time with like layers of ice and snow. And then I just went back a couple of weeks ago and saw where it's just greenery, and it's so pretty up there. Like I can see the small town vibe of why people like yourself, my girlfriend, other people that have, wanted to leave. and pursue other places. But I think for me, for somebody seeing it for the first time, it is kind of a cool little town. It's got some charm to it.
Oh yeah, I mean, there's a lot of goodness up there. People leave and they come back. I mean, we've even talked about it. My husband and I are like, this would not be a bad place to be, except for the snow. It's like
yeah,
torturous.
That's very true.
Yeah, when we visited, I was like, man, I wouldn't want to live here. But again, we saw it probably in the worst.
I think it was -5 with the wind chill.
Dude, it was brutal. Yeah. I mean, we walked out on that on the
little jetty.
Yeah, the jetty with the lighthouse, and I mean, it was blowing wind. It was all iced over. I was like, yeah, I don't want to be.
Oh yeah, I mean, the winter's crazy. The first time my husband came, and he grew up in northern Scotland in the mountains, and he had been in Florida for work and then flown up to Erie. He was like, where the hell are we?
Yeah.
Like, why is it so cold here?
But the summers you can fish for walleye, there's so much to do. In the fall, like, I mean, so I'm bummed that I'm not going up, in 2 weeks from now to where it'll be almost like peak. But yeah, just the fall colors and everything up there. And it's such a massive lake. It really is a pretty area. So, but that's really cool to hear kind of how it all got started, to see you go into it.
Now, I want to ask though, so you're 5 generations, and you have, I know you have a sister, obviously she's also in the book, but, and she also served. But do you have any other siblings, or is it just you two?
We do. So I'm the oldest, and then we have a sister in the middle. And she didn't do anything in the military, but she's had a great career in kind of finance and tech and things like that. She would have been a great soldier. Yeah. But she's just wasn't.
So obviously your other sister, so it's just 3 girls, right?
That's right. Yeah, no boys. They always say I was my dad's son.
Because I imagine, how does like your parents and grandparents feel with you and Christine serving, and especially like, I guess, continuing the generation of being a 5th generation Army?
Oh yeah, I mean, they were so proud of us. I think that when I commissioned in 2003 and went straight to a unit and straight to Iraq, and I think that really kind of weighed on my parents. I remember my mom saying she broke out into hives for months at a time, and now that we all have kids, I can imagine like sending your kids off to war would be the scariest thing on the planet, right? And especially back then when it's almost 20 years ago. You could only call once a month or whatever it was, and just the unknown, I think, really ate at them. But I know how proud they are, and even my extended family, my uncles and aunts, they're always posting stuff and just talking about our time in the military, and just that's their connection to it and how proud they are. And then our oldest daughter, my stepdaughter, but our oldest daughter, she just joined the Army, so she's in her advanced individual training at Fort Benning as a cavalry scout, and then hoping to go to West Point next year. So it continues. So it's pretty cool. Yeah,
that's very cool. I don't know if I know anybody who's that multi-generational. Like, no. I know a few families that are like 3 generations, maybe 4, but I think that's the first time I've heard somebody who's 5 generations.
Yeah. It's not continuous, right? Like they were involved in some war and then there was a break, but there's 5 in a row.
So how is that? Because I'm genuinely intrigued. Like, how is that lineage? Have you guys traced it back, and like, how is that, I guess, talked about within your family?
Yeah, we've just kind of started to. Actually, last year, my dad and I were writing an article, and he's always said you're 5th generation, and I'm like, we need to figure out what that means, who did what. And we started looking, and literally every war one of our family members has been in, and it extends. It's my dad's side, but on my mom's side, is in the Air Force too, in Vietnam. All the way back to the Revolution. So it's pretty cool.
Could be Colonel Sanders in there.
No, that's incredible. Because obviously we enjoy storytelling. I mean, we think it's critically important. So that's why I was genuinely curious about 5 generations, if there's like a recorded history of that, and like if there's, I don't know, a trunk in the attic or something of your parents' house or something that has like memorabilia and things like that. I think that would be
my dad started to put it all together, and in their house right now he has my one grandfather was the adjutant to Eisenhower, and he found this letter, written to him, and just putting all this stuff together. And he's putting, the slides that pictures on the little slides that people used to do in the 70s and 80s. Mm-hmm. He's putting all of that together, and he found my grandfather's stuff from Korea and from Vietnam, and then a bunch of stuff from World War II. I mean, it's fascinating. Yeah. And my uncle, who actually did not serve in the military, but is probably the biggest supporter, talks about it more than anyone. He is now kind of in charge of compiling all that, so it's pretty neat.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Well, I'm sure he's excited to do all that, to share his family story and be, a patriotic person in that role.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's just as important as serving, I think, is just contributing on the outside and just linking communities that aren't linked to a military base or something to what's going on. I mean, it's a huge role out there for people, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. You guys are gonna have a little museum at your house.
A lot of bad smells.
Yeah. So you said right after you commissioned in 2003, you immediately deployed. What was that transition, I guess, coming out and going to? Because I guess you would have went to OCS, right? You would have had to go through. Is that right?
Yeah. So OBC.
OBC, that's right.
So the kind of logistics basic course or whatever. That was my first branch that I went into, and graduated at the beginning of December. And my unit was part of the 3rd Armored Cavalry Regiment was part of the invasion that March. And so when I got there in December, I'm like, oh, there's no way they're going to send me to Iraq. I'll be on the rear detachment or whatever they were calling it back then, and just get everything ready for the unit coming back. And I signed in, and they were like, hey, tomorrow go to the CIF, like our central issuing facility, pick up your uniforms, your flak jacket, and you're on the next flight out there. I was like, holy crap, really? So that was quite a transition, to be honest, because even in OBC, I was still seeing my college girlfriends, and I still kind of felt connected like that, and we were going out to bars and dancing, doing all the normal stuff you do when you're 21 or 22.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden I land in Kuwait and then get on another plane, and they fly us straight to Al Asad Air Base in Iraq, me and another lieutenant that I'm still good friends with. And I just remember getting off, and it was like just that heat that kind of comes in the back of the plane as you're exiting, and I was like, where the hell am I? What am I doing? 2 weeks ago I was freaking dancing it up, and now I'm in the center of Iraq. So that was pretty difficult, but I would say within 2 weeks it was kind of like, all right, game on. This is where I was supposed to be. Let's do this.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's an interesting feeling because I've been asked that a few times, and you kind of described it perfectly. Is that initial blast of heat when you step off
it's like a dry heat
into a country? Yeah.
So it's like kind of where we grew up, like high
very
desert.
Similar. Yeah, but imagine being in conditioned space or wherever you're in a bird, and then you're going there, but you don't know what you're expecting, and then you just get blasted with this heat.
It's like a giant hair dryer.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
And the smell, I always know your senses kind of take over, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I still viscerally know that smell, and that just the feel and the sand in the air, the dust.
It's interesting that you say that, because I remember all of my deployments based on the smell.
Really?
Yeah.
That's fine.
Yeah. Like I distinctly remember what Mosul smelled like. I remember what Baghdad smelled like.
Weird.
Yeah. I remember what different provinces in Afghanistan smell like.
Is it just vile?
No, what's interesting is it really depends on where you're at. Like there's certain areas where it does smell good. Like there's a lot of foliage, and there's a lot of plants and fig trees, and it'll smell really good. But then when you walk into some streets, they're open sewers, so it's above ground sewage, and
burning trash. I always remember smelling.
Yeah, the burning trash one was I can vehemently I can smell it right now.
That's just the burn pits. They have everything going.
In Baghdad, we were immediately next to the burn pits, and I remember every day talking about it, because the air would literally be green when they were burning something like super toxic. I don't know what they were
That's
burning.
like a chemical
like,
burn. If it's
yeah,
turning
oh
green.
yeah, like you could feel it in your lungs. It was like you were just doing like an intense 5 mile or something like that. Like you could feel it burning in your lungs. And I was like, yeah, this is good for us. And this was in let's see, 2007, 2008.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, 2008. So people were kind of talking about it, but not really. Obviously, people are talking about it all the time now. But I remember talking about it and being like, guys, this can't be good for us. And they're like, no, you'll be fine.
The metal in the air.
Yeah. You know? They'll be like, no, you're fine.
And now
fine.
It's coming out.
Yeah, they told us it's okay. You're okay.
So, Katie, how many deployments did you do, or how many trips, I guess, were you going back and forth to Iraq in the Middle East?
So I just did 2 deployments to Iraq, but then I lived in Jordan for 3 years in Amman, Jordan. And then I have been going back and forth to the Middle East for the last 10 years.
Wow.
You know, I mean, before COVID, every couple of months. And then, you know, the one job I did working for General Votel, we went every month for kind of 2 or 3 weeks at a time. So I've never counted up the days. I've been meaning to, but I've been to almost every country in the Middle East and Central Asia, all the stands, all around the Gulf, everywhere.
What's your favorite?
I love it. To be honest, my favorite is Central Asia. Really? So, you know, people really don't, I mean, I surely didn't understand kind of what those countries, you know, even where they were on the map, like you see them, but, you know, we would call them like the flyover states in America, right? So it's just, you're transiting from Asia across to Europe, you would fly over them. But it's this mix of like East meets West. And it's like a mix of Asia, Russian influence, Arab influence. I mean, the people are beautiful. The food is mostly good, except for horse meat, which they eat.
Yeah, I won't eat that.
But
I like horses too much.
Yeah, I know. They brought it out for one dinner, and I remember it was like gray. I'm like, what is this?
It's got to be tough, I would imagine.
It's horse meat. I just like moved it around the plate. I'm like, I'm not.
Yeah, poor sea biscuit.
It's a really cool place out there, and it's beautiful. Mountains, just the colors, the scenery. It's incredible.
So, and for people listening, what's really cool is obviously you and your sister's dynamic with your husbands is obviously you're still active, your husband is not, and then your sister is not active and her husband is. So it's kind of a cool flip. Did you meet your husband while you're in the service then?
I did, yeah. So my husband was a British fighter pilot that now is retired and flies for United Airlines. And then my sister's husband, she met in the service as well. And he is a special forces officer still serving at Fort Bragg.
That's crazy.
So it's fun dinner table conversation.
Yeah.
Kind of the family business in a lot of ways.
Does it ever, like, I imagine that's kind of the topic that either all 4 of you get together and stay away from talking about, or it's just a general topic that probably is always going on with current events and stuff like that too?
Yeah, I would say we don't talk about, you know, our jobs as much, but we talk about current events a lot.
Gotcha.
And my parents are big news buffs, and my middle sister and her husband, you know, they follow all of it as well. So it's more of that, you know, it's just kind of the surrounding topics that we bring up. But then my brother-in-law, the SF guy, you know, I work at Special Operations Command Central for the Middle East now. So he and I talk a lot, just at work even, about what's going on, kind of help each other out.
And you know, obviously with your sister, you being the oldest and, you know, one of your younger sisters who commissioned, and I think you commissioned her, didn't you?
I did, yeah. My dad and I did together.
That's really cool. So what was that like for you? I imagine obviously your dad has a proud dad moment for, you know, his daughters serving the military, but I imagine you being the older sister, did you have a very proud moment of seeing your sister commission?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Christine, so she's 6 years younger than me, and we were always very close. So I was stationed in DC after I left Colorado my first couple of deployments, and she was in college at Virginia Tech. She was a sorority girl, kind of doing normal college, and she lived with me the summer between her sophomore and junior year and junior and senior year. Okay, and she was in hospitality management and doing a couple of internships. And so the end of the summer, between her junior and senior year, she came home one night from work, and I was sitting on the couch or something, and she's like, listen, I have something really, really serious I need to tell you. And I was like, are you pregnant? Like, what's the deal?
That's what that sounds like.
And she's like, I want to join the Army. And I'm like, what? I mean, it floored me. We had never talked about it. I mean, absolutely not. I mean, she's an incredible leader, athlete, all of that, but it just wasn't something I saw her doing, because she just had never brought it up. And I'm like, are you sure? Like, let's sleep on this, you know? And so next morning she's like, no, I'm serious. I really want to do it. And so I called a couple of friends that were in kind of recruiting command and said, how does she do this? What's the least painful way she can, join the Army, become an officer? And they're like, oh, there's no non-painful way. You got to go to basic training. You got to be a private, and then you can go to OCS if, they let you. And so she did it. And I went to her basic training graduation, and she looked happy. And then her OCS, I commissioned her, and then she went out to Fort Carson, Colorado, my first duty station as well. And she went straight to Afghanistan. And I just remember going, oh God, like if anything happens to her, I'll never forgive myself. But she's dominated it. I mean, she absolutely loved it. And it's just a connection that's really special to share. And now that she's out, I think it's nice for her to still get to talk to me about the military and kind of stay connected.
So a frat girl that went in the Army.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. Obviously, she looks up to you. Like, obviously coming to you and telling, there's got to be some kind of level of her just appreciating what you're doing and being like, I want to be like my older sister. I want to, commission and go into the Army.
Yeah, I think so. And she and I are very similar personality wise. And I think she saw the camaraderie I had with my friends, my fellow lieutenants, just what it felt like to lead soldiers, going to war even. I mean, she saw when I came back, just the memories you share. And, 20 years later, I'm still friends with all the same people. I'm sure you are, Dan. And I think she wanted that. She's a social butterfly and a leader. And she saw that the Army fulfilled all those needs and went after that.
And from obviously meeting up with both you when I interviewed you and took your photos for our book, on the inside, I feel like you guys are just very intelligent, very charismatic, you care about people. On the outside, it's kind of like she's like the sweet one and you're like the badass one.
Yeah, she's that's a little bit of a facade for her. She can be pretty cutting, but she plays that card. But yeah, she knows what she's doing out there now that she's leading that, the nonprofit for veterans. Just a perfect fit for her right now, and she gets it. She can see through. I think that a lot of organizations, have a hard time getting to the heart of what veterans really need.
Yeah.
And she was one. She's connected to her husband, obviously, to me, and she can bring some reality to that on a daily basis for the investors and people that are trying to figure out where to go forward with it.
Well, you've got nearly 60,000 organizations that somewhat support veterans or benefit veterans, but it's very hard to find the few in between that actually are doing the right job of doing just that.
Yeah, absolutely.
We have a father and son that also serve together simultaneously, and it's really cool to see multi-generational. But, and they share a story when they were deployed simultaneously and they were actually able to go on an objective together. But I wonder, did you guys ever pass by each other or overlap in a deployment at all, or have the same region or anything like that?
No, we never did, unfortunately, because I was kind of doing the Gulf and in Iraq, and her units was doing Afghanistan. But I always wanted to do that. I was always hoping when she stayed in that would happen. And now with my brother-in-law, we try to align sometimes, and it hasn't worked yet. But I always thought that would be, it's quite the picture, right? I think you're talking about Sergeant Major Thetford.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah.
Right. Thetford.
Yep.
Yeah. I worked with him at CENTCOM for a couple of years. He's awesome, and I've met his son, and that's a cool story to tell.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, of them kicking outdoors together that one night. That's a pretty cool story.
Wild.
Yeah, that's insane. For that to happen.
How did you guys keep in touch at all then? What was that like? Both being in Iraq and Afghanistan, was it easy? Because back then, I feel like it wasn't even when cell phones were really around and when they were first coming up.
Yeah, so we were deployed at different times, which was helpful. Okay. So when I was in Iraq, actually, I did not get to talk to her that much because she was in college, and if I got one call home, it was to my parents, and if she happened to be there, so it was more emails. But then when she went to Afghanistan, which was later, I think around 2010, she and I emailed probably every other day. Just kind of stream of consciousness diary going on. I wanted to go back and look at those emails just to see, I thought that would be a cool little story to tell, book to write at some point, just the letters to each other back and forth.
Well, I think that's such. I think you should.
Yeah.
Because that's again a story that's not often told, and especially being sisters and having a lot of like commonalities there in service. I would imagine you have a lot of. I have something in my throat. Anyways, I imagine you have a lot of like similar thoughts and things and processing things differently. So I would imagine there's a lot of questions that go back and forth that typically wouldn't happen when even, I don't know, two friends are serving together. It's a much more connected thought process.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, and what I've noticed, I looked through some emails I sent to my dad on my first deployment a couple of years ago, and I was struck by the humor in them. That's what I was, I thought I would kind of go back and look at all these serious emails and like, today was, the second day of the war and blah, blah, blah. But they weren't. It was, a lot of them were me telling stories about soldiers. I mean, there's nothing funnier out there than a second lieutenant and bunch of soldiers, right? So it's stories like that, pulling over a Humvee, breaking down, dumping hot coffee on yourself, stuff like that, more than the mission stories, ironically. And I always thought, hey, that's what you're writing home about, is just the human factor. That's what keeps you connected. And then with my dad and also my sister, there was also just the deep understanding. So you're not having to explain rank or, stuff that, like, they just get it. And so I think that there was an ease when I was writing them both emails, that they would understand, what I was trying to say on the other side.
Yeah. How often are there kind of embarrassing moments that come up on being like
day.
Every day?
Oh God, yeah.
I would imagine every day in the military, there's something that happens that you just have to chuckle.
Like, I'm curious to hear, like, maybe Katie, you went through some, but I'm curious to hear, like, what are kind of like the outlandish, like, kind of embarrassing moments you might have had, like, whether it's on your deployments or, just being commissioned right now.
Oh yeah. To prevent myself from incriminating, my fellow lieutenants. No, I'm just kidding. But so my first platoon were fuelers. So, when you join the military, you take the ASVAB test and you score a certain range, and then you get to pick what your specialty is when you enter the military. Mm-hmm. And of course, the Army needs all range of skills, but stereotypically, fuelers are not always known for being Einstein, let's just say, right? And they're more, hardworking and come from different backgrounds.
Yeah.
Dan can tell you their real story, but some of the things I remember, it's like classic soldier stories. So if you got a family emergency and you needed to leave your deployment, or they just needed to get news across, they would send a Red Cross message, right? Mm-hmm. And I remember at some point, one of my friends got a Red Cross message that his soldier needed to go home because his wife had a severe head injury from falling off of a dancing pole. And we were all like, holy crap. Not a car accident, but
a dancing pole.
And I'm like, this is just classic soldier stories right there. You're like, you come off a convoy and you're happy you didn't get blown up that day. And you come into the admin tent, the S1, and that's the kind of stuff that you're dealing with. You're like, oh my God, what is going on?
Your wife, Cinnamon, fell off the pole today at Cheetahs. And we need you to come home and take care of her.
Well, what's so funny about that is that's exactly, I guarantee you, the process that somebody went through was like, this is funny. I at least have to put in there that they fell off a dancing pole, but I don't want to not put that in there.
Yeah, how do I say it without saying it, right?
Yep, yeah. Exactly.
Oh, man. So obviously, I think you recently told us you just hit 18 years this summer, correct?
That's right.
So what has kind of been the major takeaway that you've learned so far in your extensive military career?
Wow, that's a big question. I mean, the takeaway is, I think that the military is such a good representation of America, kind of overall. And if you're looking for the perfect kind of, you walk into a military unit, just take one platoon away and say it had 50 people in it. It looks like America. right? It sounds like America. It feels like America. And so I think that, as we have become increasingly divided as a country in the last couple of years, I think the military is trying very hard to still hold on to that kind of apolitical nature. We're all inclusive. It's diverse, not on purpose, right? It's diverse because it works and it looks like America. And I think that we need to make sure the military kind of stays like that and is representative of everyone, and doesn't kind of play to one side or another, so that we maintain the trust of the American people going forward. Because, as China and, Russia and continue to kind of amass power, either economically or militarily, politically, we need to make sure that our Department of Defense still remains the envy of all these countries. And we do that by maintaining the trust of the American people, right? So I think that we just need to be very, very careful about that going forward. And, everything from the pull of Afghanistan to vaccines and things like that recently, it makes me feel a little bit uneasy, because that's just stuff we never talked about. You smoke and joke and you talk about who you voted for kind of when you're in a convoy or something like that. But at the end of the day, none of that ever mattered, when you're sitting at the DFAC or you're coming off a mission. And I think it's really important that we maintain that.
Do you think this huge divide of I don't want to get political, but this just came in my head, and I feel like it's an interesting conversation for maybe someone of your level. Do you think that this kind of mass divide of America, where you see people that aren't supporting military, that are slandering men and women that are, enlisting or commissioning, I think this all stems from social media. Like, because if you think back to like the earlier, days of the war and all that, we were so patriotic as a country. We were so patriotic, to support our veterans and support our troops. And now you've kind of got like this massive divide. What are kind of your thoughts on that? And I'm assuming, like I said, I feel like it does come from social media pulling people one way or another, and they're seeing certain articles or certain things about veterans or the military as a whole.
Yeah, I think social media is, a huge problem. It's also helpful in some ways, but I think that that's definitely been the largest contributor to dividing us, right? And I also think it's just, as the wars went on for 20 years, the American public became less invested, emotionally. It's just the last story on the news, if it was on the news at all. And there just wasn't this drive to people say support the troops and, you give $1 to a certain organization and things like that. But it just became kind of a cliche,
It became our everyday lives. It was for 20 years. Like, I even forgot about it. I was so used to just knowing that we had presence in the Middle East, and that was it.
Well, that was, again, my original intention kind of behind the book is I wanted people to remember that it's been 20 years of war, and that there have been continuous service, like continuous boots on the ground, people who have served overseas, and it's continuous, and they didn't go away. They're still there. There's still people serving overseas and still fighting overseas. And it's been unfortunate with what happened in Afghanistan. But the one thing that I will say about it, the fact that it hit the news cycle, is it did make people remember and realize that people have been serving for the last 20 years. And that level of unity, I felt like, started coming back. And so I've definitely been re-encouraged the last couple of months. There's been a lot of really good things that have happened, even with the bad things that have happened in Afghanistan. I think a lot of good has still come from it. And my hope is that the conversation continues and that people can, continue to share their story. I do hope that you guys turn your emails into a book and do something like that. I think it would be incredible. I agree. People have become more divided, and I think the veteran community, the military community, is a perfect example of how you can dispel every narrative that's out there. As long as you have a common mission, you're going to be united because you're there for each other. And I think that's something that the message the American people need to hear, and it needs to come from veterans, and it needs to come from service members.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a real beauty in having, you don't want this homogenous thought out there. You don't want all the military thinking the same way or voting the same way. That's the goodness of it. And it's just reminding people of that. I think that's important.
Yeah.
And it's, not trying to change someone's opinion. We can all be friends and think differently. And that was always okay because we were, pursuing one mission. And I think now that, the missions have kind of died down, it's difficult to figure out, what is our place in the world as the military? What is the common enemy? It's really easy to come together when you have a common enemy.
Yeah.
And when you don't, I think we're all kind of, especially the veteran community, is struggling. What did that mean? What's next, right?
Well, I wish civilians like me could almost find that one mission that we're going after. Like, what is that? Maybe we can figure out, set our differences aside, go back to kind of the older days where you can say what's on your mind and it's not going to offend everybody. It's not going to split you guys apart. You guys can respect that you're your own person and have different beliefs, different religious backgrounds, different political stances. But it's almost trying to find, with that said, what is that one mission that we can all push towards and unite on that?
Yeah, I think that's the difficult part. I mean, you had the Cold War, and that was easy, right? For 40 years, everyone was like, hey, Russia's bad, communism's bad. And everyone kind of got that, right?
Then you had 9/11.
Global war and terrorism for 20 years. And I think now we're like, okay, we know China's bad in a way, right? I mean, it's an adversary. You also need to work with them. But I think that, in the national defense community, we're struggling to get that narrative out there. What do we mean by the United States competing with China? Is this kind of a space race type of situation? Is this I'm hoping that when the national defense strategy comes out next year and the administration talks about, what our priorities are as a country, that maybe that will help.
And it can't just be war. It can't just be war that's bringing us together, because that seems to be the pattern.
Yeah, and that's why I'm thinking, is it more something along the tech race? Things like that kind of unite us. Hey, we're the most advanced country in the world. Let's remind ourselves of that. Let's get kids involved in tech, or are we going to be known for the arts, or just something that is going to bring us all together? And so kids in school kind of know that's what I'm going towards.
Yeah. No, I think that's critically important. And I think, Bo, you had a really great point. And I think when events like 9/11 happen, everybody's united because they're like, we know we got to go find the people responsible for it. Mm-hmm. And so it almost takes another global event or global effort or something to happen that would unite us. But, the one thing that has been, I don't know, that has concerned me more than anything is that there is a global event going on, but it seems like it's dividing us, which is frustrating to see with the pandemic. And so I don't know. And it's probably because it's a long span event, right? It didn't a bunch of people didn't just get COVID and then, some people died and then boom, it's gone. No, it's lasting years. And so people are having a hard time figuring out how to process that. And I think that's why it's dividing people more. I think it does, unfortunately, it's gonna be one of those events where something happens, like a meteor is about to come strike Earth or something like that. And then we're we're gonna have Armageddon. We're gonna have a bunch of misfits go to space or something. I don't know. But
no, I totally agree. And I mean, you guys both make really good points with this. It's like, hey, I don't want to say the pandemic is an opportunity, but it should have been an opportunity to, increase investment in biotech and the healthcare industry and, all this stuff coming together as a world, right? As the globe, and putting the smartest people into Pfizer, Moderna, whatever. Hey, figure this out, help us. That should have been a uniting thing. And for some reason it hasn't. And we have climate change on the horizon too. I think it's probably the next big thing, and that should be uniting us in so many ways. And the mass migration that's going to come, and just trying to figure that out. And it's not just a military problem. It's how do we come together as a society to start fighting this kind of.
Not only that, but I think I read a recent article where it said that China was on the road to becoming the next major superpower by 2035. That was kind of their goal, was basically to take over America's position. And
well, depending on who you talk to, they already are trying to do that. I think they have the largest.
Sooner.
They have the largest naval fleet. They have more ships than the U.S. They, I think they have the. Correct me if I'm wrong on any of this, Katie, but I think they have the largest military as well. So there's a lot of things. Now their capabilities are not as advanced yet, but they're getting there as the U.S.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you're right on with what you were saying. But I listened to a great seminar the other day by the Center for Naval Analysis, and people can look this up. It's all open source, but they were talking about reimagining defense, and a lot of it was focused on China. And it was the guy that wrote The Kill Chain, which is kind of understand, decide, kill. And it's not just about the kill chain. It's about, you need to understand the problem before you make a decision. And then once you make a decision, you need to act on it, not so much, going into a house and killing a terrorist.
Yeah.
But the other guy was a strategist, guy, Dr. Carter Malkasian. And it was scary when they were talking about China. Back to the Navy thing. They said that at this point, China can probably build ships faster than the U.S. could build the munitions to strike them.
Wow.
Yep.
That's scary.
Yep.
Yeah. And just things like that. And we're so behind on that. And, a lot of it's just how we do. And this is more on the government side of the house when it comes to just our procurement systems and, the bureaucratic nature of that, and trying to figure out how to blend it with, commercial side of the house and being serious about this, getting after this. And this is not just a government problem. We need to all come together on this.
Well, the military industrial complex is talked about all the time about like how it's this horrible thing. And I can agree in some ways that, yes, there have been built incentives to for companies to sell single-use products, or to that the government's going to purchase, or to put these ridiculous margins on components that the government needs, and all these other things. And like they have an incentive to stay in war, but at the same time, it could be restructured to benefit, and it creates a lot of jobs and a lot of different things that happen. But especially when you're talking about China and you're talking about how fast they can build things and how quickly they can develop, like if we take our foot off the gas, it can be a very serious problem. And it's already starting to build that way. And I hope when the national defense strategy comes out next year, I agree. I hope more people start paying attention. And it is in the news a little bit, like usually it makes its little cycle here and there. So people are hearing it, but I hope people will start realizing how serious it is.
Yeah. And it's, back to kind of Bo's point earlier, not everything can be a war, right? So China, we have to somehow compete with them so they don't kind of take over as a preeminent superpower so soon, while also working with them on things like climate change. It's their use of fossil fuels and all the increase of people driving cars there. That's what's driving this. And if we can't, hold two competing thoughts in our head, like, hey, you guys steal intellectual property, you're bad, we need to figure out how to do this. Also saying, hey, we need to have a climate summit with you, President Xi, and you need to get half your cars off the road or make them go electric by 2040. We have to figure out how to do both of those things at the same time.
Yeah, man, that's got to be difficult.
You know what it is they invented TikTok to distract us from them building all their ships and getting ahead of us.
That's exactly it.
Yeah.
5 years of our nation's brightest teenagers.
They're like, hey,
instead of inventing spaceships.
People love to dance. Let's just send this out and, we'll distract them like that for about 5 years.
It works. That's quite a strategy.
So I want to talk a little bit about how we got connected with you. Obviously we, General Votel wrote the foreword for our book. I've known him since he was the regimental commander when I first got to 2nd Ranger Battalion. I think he was the 2nd regimental commander right after I got there. But how did your relationship with him evolve, especially working at Special Operations Command and then CENTCOM, things like that? Like, how did that begin?
Yeah, absolutely. So I served in Jordan for 3 years, kind of from 2012 to 2015. And at that time, he was a JSOC commander. So I think that, we ran into each other a couple of times when he would come through the embassy in Jordan. But I really met him when I was serving in the UK. After that, I was embedded on the British Joint Staff, and we were working on a plan for Syria with the UK, us and a couple of other countries. And he came over, and I actually was briefing on behalf of the Brits since I was embedded on their staff. And the briefing went really well, and I kind of talked to his staff afterwards. And I got a call maybe, I don't know, 3 or 4 weeks later. I was in a meeting, and I just had a Post-it note on my desk that said his XO at the time, Colonel Oslin, called, and he wants to set up a phone call with General Votel. And I was like, oh my God, what the hell have I done wrong? Like, that's pretty significant disciplinary action there coming from the CENTCOM commander, to a major. And so I called Colonel Oslin back, and he's like, hey, General Votel wants to interview you to be his aide. He's going to call from the plane tonight. I'm like, holy crap. Okay. So we ended up talking. The call went really well, and I flew back to CENTCOM and did an interview with him. And then he hired me on to be his aide for his last year in the military, really. So his last year at CENTCOM, and then before he retired. And it was, the best job you could ever have. It's just a strategic education every day.
He's a great guy too.
The world together, and he's just the best leader on the planet, bar none, and not biased at all. And got to know his wife Michelle, who's an incredible supporter of the military and veterans, very well. And we're still in very close touch. They're godparents to one of my kids.
Wow.
And Joe and I work on some writing projects together. And he's the leader we need right now in the military. He's just great. And kind of, not only was he, Dan working with him, soldier, right? I mean, one of the first guys out of the plane to Afghanistan, so humble, like a true warrior. But he also just thinks big. He brought women into special forces, into combat arms, hired a female aide for the first time. Like he gets what we need as a Department of Defense, as the government. He gets where we're going, and he does that quietly, without a lot of fanfare. And I think we've all learned a lot from him.
Well, he's got such a kind of a quiet disposition, but he's very like matter of fact at the same time. He's a general. Like if anyone can picture what a general is, he has that to the T.
Right.
But he's also like you've got this like hidden humor with him. Like I remember meeting him in DC in his office to take his photo for the book after he wrote the foreword. I remember walking in, he's dressed professionally. He's got suit and tie and all that. But I could have swore he had like these like colorful socks, and he kicked his feet up and he was like, yeah, just, hey, sit down, Bo. And he's like talking to me, and I'm like, you're kind of intimidated at first, because you're like, I'm even a civilian that's kind of like standing, looking in the eyes of this 4-star general. And so I'm just trying to like, yes, sir, be professional and talk to him. But he's kind of like letting the edge off a little bit and being humorous and talking to me and smiling the whole time. And he's just got a good energy to him.
Oh yeah. He's actually really funny and sarcastic. And he's the youngest of like 8 boys or something.
That's
so
crazy.
I think that
that
probably contributed to his personality, because he's just very, very patient. And then, when you need to release the hounds, he does it like surgically almost. But that's the biggest lesson I learned from him was patience. We went through a lot his last year with President Trump like tweeting our way out of Syria, and very, very strategic problems, and my desk was right outside his office, as aide, and so I go in and out. And I remember the first couple of months, some big things happened, and I would go in and kind of like, oh my God, can you believe this, sir? Like da 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 da. And he kind of looked at me like, calm down. Like this is all going to be okay. And it was after that I learned like, wow, that's how you got to where you are now. It's just this patience and prudence to kind of think through problems logically, and then use words, not that or the other.
Yeah, it's definitely. I respect him for so many different things, but definitely that it's easy when you're at the top to forget about those basic principles you learn in leadership, to like think, think, pause, act, or pause, think, act. And it's really important, especially for people at the top, to do that. And I was actually listening to his interview on the Green Notebook, and they actually asked about that situation in Syria, and what his response to that was. And I thought he had a really good, I don't want to quote exactly what he said, but I remember he had a really good response, and he was like, yeah, I was more or less frustrated with the situation, but we knew what we needed to do, and he had a really good response. And I can imagine being there, it would have been one of those moments where you could easily get very pissed off and frustrated because there's a lot of, relationship building that was there with the Kurds and everything in Syria, and to see it basically the rug pulled from under you via a tweet is a difficult thing to process.
Yeah, and you probably heard it on that same podcast, but he has a thing called command and feedback. I think he's learned a little bit from General Mattis, but he kind of took it to the next level almost and centered his communication style around that. And so command and feedback is a little bit different than the traditional command and control, what you think of in the military. A decision is made at the top and it filters all the way down. And his, this isn't PhD level math by any means, but his was, communication comes from the top, it goes down to the bottom, and then you want the feedback from the bottom back to the top. So you have this kind of constant OODA loop of decision making because you are understanding, how they interpreted the guidance from the lowest level, and then you use that to slowly adjust. And then he always talks about just a number of kind of things that you should do that contribute to command and feedback, and one of the foremost ones is just telling the truth, right? Avoiding the indefinite maybe. So when this stuff happened with Syria, when we had to tell General Mazloum, he just told him, right? He just told him the facts, and it wasn't all this like colorful language around it. And I think that's how he garnered so much respect from, other foreign military leaders, was they knew he would tell them the truth right away. And they're, and no, if no is the answer, just say no, right? And it purgatory, the period in between a yes and a no is always the worst. Just give me a no. It's a no.
Yep.
And he was really good at that.
I think more people just need to be that matter of fact. Like, we kind of beat around the bush to be polite, and I understand it to a certain degree, but I think that if everyone started being more like that, it would start to retrain us a little bit to be more accepting to having those matter of fact situations of a yes or no.
Well, a lot of people too try and justify their decision before they give their answer. Like to Katie's point, instead of just saying yes or no and then having a conversation about it, a lot of people like to say, I've been looking at this and I've been thinking about how I'm going to, respond to this, and I've been thinking about this and this is affecting that and this, and then ultimately we decided no.
It's opposite. They flip it. They try and sugarcoat it.
Yeah, but you need to just tell people up front and then have a conversation around it.
That's important.
I take it better that way. Like, for instance, let's just say if it's you basically sign up for a job. You're applying for a job. I'd rather somebody be like, no, and this is the reason why, and then you can kind of fix those reasons why, or you can find out what it was the answer no came from, or yes, in that regard. So I think I deal with it better that way, but I don't know if everyone's like that.
Yeah, I think most people we all want to improve and get, better at anything that we're doing. So tell you what you're doing wrong, right?
Yeah.
With obviously you going in as early as 2003, and we just marked 20-year anniversary of not only 9/11 but the global war on terror. What have kind of been the main takeaways that you've learned from that? You've obviously had an extensive career leading up, and you're still active to this point. What are kind of some of your experiences or takeaways that you've had from that?
Yeah, I think that if you look over kind of the last 20 years, like the big lessons you learn as a strategic planner, what are our political objectives when we go into a place, right? And that's how you kind of, in the planning world, we call them ends, ways, and means, right? What are the ends we're trying to achieve? And, at what point, if we haven't achieved them, should we stop moving towards that? Or when we actually have gotten to a good enough place, kind of let's be done. And I think that it's kind of what we've struggled with as a nation and as the Department of Defense the last 20 years. And not, to do a post-mortem on people's decisions politically, because it's spanned all parties and it's spanned 20 years. But I think we kind of fumbled our way through some of these things, right? And we kind of had 21-year wars. And I think next time that we, go to commit such a huge amount of blood and treasure for the U.S. taxpayer, and it's not just the military, it's, it's as a nation, we need to be very clear about what we're trying to achieve. And I think that, there's all the three branches of government, and Congress at some point needs to they're the oversight and ask, hey, what are we still doing there?
Mm-hmm.
And just be, back to our points about make the main thing the main thing. Let's talk about facts and just be very clear-eyed, clear-headed about what we are doing when we commit this level of investment.
I don't know if you guys can answer it because this is kind of a question for both you, Katie, and Dan, but obviously both of you doing deployments and being in the military, did you for one think that this war was going to go on for as long as it did? And do you think that it was planned to be 20 years? 4 presidencies.
The simplest answer is no and no.
I like those.
No, I think for me, and this is me personally, but I joined in 2006. So that was right when kind of, I guess, right before the major surge in 2008, but there was a significant ramp up. It was slowly starting to ramp up. And when we were drawing down, then my 4th deployment, I went to Afghanistan. We were drawing down Iraq. We had very limited presence. We were starting to remove a lot of people. This would have been 2009, 2010. I was like, okay, well, clearly.
So you got a massive plane flying over you.
Yeah, I hear that.
Yeah, all good. But yeah, I saw the transition to Afghanistan. And then when we were in Afghanistan, I was like, all right, well, there's still clearly a reason for us to be here. Taliban are still a significant threat in the region. We were doing a lot of things with Pakistan, trying to figure out like how we were going to work with them. Osama bin Laden was still around. But then after, Osama bin Laden was killed, I was like, all right, we're going to give the country back over to the Afghans any year, like any time now. And I truthfully thought, I was like, this war is going to be done by, 2013, 2014. I was like, we'd be gone. So no, I did not see it lasting, another 10 years after my last deployment.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I agree with both of those, no and no. And it's, I don't think anyone ever sets out to kind of make poor decisions. And we probably won't be able to analyze this for another, 10 or 15 years when it's a little bit less emotional. Sure. But there were definitely some points that we should have probably off-ramped, and we stayed because it's a combination of, as Americans, we want to help people. Yeah. And so maybe the mission changed and shifted, but we still thought we were doing a good job, right? We were bringing prosperity to either Iraq or Afghanistan, women's rights. There were things that were getting better, right? So I think anytime you do see incremental progress, you're very hesitant to stop making incremental progress. Sure. So it's just making the hard decision. And kind of back to that podcast I was talking about with China and those 2 guys, one of the things that they said that kind of struck me was, I forget the quote, but it was essentially like, prioritization is the key to strategy, and that is being able to say no. So you have to be able to say no to certain things, or you have not prioritized. So if you have a list of 1 to 10, and you can only do 3 things, that means saying no to the other 7. Yeah. Not like it's back to this indefinite maybe thing, right? And we haven't done that as a country, and that's everyone. That's the military, that's the taxpayers, that's Congress. And so I think that, going forward, when we do have China climbing, power with climate change issues, mass migration, just all this stuff, we're going to have to figure out as a country, what we are going to invest in, and it can't be everything. Right.
No, we need to figure out one to tackle and then move to the next.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I'm taking a step back a little bit, but I think this does matter with like how we talk about this. It's always been my perspective, and correct me if I'm wrong, especially working more on the strategy side of things, but it's always been that the U.S. government is who dictates policy. Yes, the DoD and other defense players will obviously try and shape policy, but ultimately policies come from Congress and from the president. Then that policy has to be executed by the military. And often what you see is a lot of people get frustrated at what our military is doing. And it's not necessarily the decisions of the generals and even people at major command centers and things like that. They're just getting a policy that's like, hey, this is your next mission. This is what you need to do. figure out how to execute it.
Yeah, and that goes back to kind of the apolitical nature of the military and why that's so important. We really are just the executors. But that puts the onus on just us as Americans. We're all citizens too, and it's holding our leadership and our representatives accountable and asking them, what are our priorities as a nation? And then you use the military when you need to. It's diplomacy first, and then you bring in defense when required.
Yeah. Well, it's again something that has broadened my perspective, and hopefully a lot of people will start realizing this is because our nation's been at war for 20 years, in the global war on terror. We've really seen an adjustment in Congress, and it's making me hopeful for the future. There are more veterans serving in Congress than ever before, except for I think right after World War II. So it's encouraging to see hopefully a lot more veterans do take office, because we've seen it from the other side where we are the ones who have to execute policy. And I'm hoping that more veterans get into Congress, can voice their opinion and say, look, we need to have a strategy and a fully executable strategy around this before making a rash decision. Or
things would be so much better, like different too, that way, to have people like that with leadership and those roles.
Well, and the other thing about veterans, and no veteran is has completely clean hands, but at the same time, veterans come from military experience. They don't come from industry. And yes, you do need some industry leaders as well, but their pockets aren't lined by businesses. They're not coming from a political perspective or a business perspective. They're coming from from that service perspective of like, they want to continue to serve their nation. And I think that's the more important perspective to have as somebody serving in Congress, whether it's in the House or the Senate.
Yeah, I think if after World War II, when so many people, the greatest generation, right? And then the 50 years that followed that, regardless of who was president, our country was pretty connected. Families all shared different political parties, and it wasn't a big deal. It was kind of just, who you check to vote for on election day. And I think it's probably worth a study at some point that, is that connection that people had, that camaraderie that they felt to the centralized mission. Now that there's this big gap, right, of people that didn't feel that, is that what is kind of contributing to the divisive nature of the country as well, right? And it kind of goes back to Dan's point. I think, the Congress is supposed to represent all Americans, and we definitely need veterans there, because I think they're good at kind of crossing the aisle and, pursuing just a central goal to support us as citizens, not necessarily a political arm. And so hopefully that can maybe get us back to being all centrists, at heart and things like that.
That's kind of the sad part, is like what you just said kind of reminds me of like, me growing up, I had family that were on both sides. And I remember it was like a joking matter. We'd all be at like a family get together, and half my family is voting Republican. The other half is voting Democrat. And I'd be like, who are you going to vote for this year? I'm voting for that. Oh, you're going to vote for them? Ah, okay. And then it would like be like a joke. Like no one ever took it like crazy, like seriously.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I hope we get back to that.
Yeah. We need to. Well, that's, for somebody who's spanned, 18-year career so far, I know you're getting towards where your career could, you could retire. Are you starting to think about, what's next after military service and what you want to do?
Yeah, definitely. I absolutely love the Army. And so, when I'm at work, I'm kind of like, I'm never going to stop doing this. This is for me. I really love this. And then when I'm, having a glass of wine at night or a cup of coffee in the morning, and I'm reading the news or just a magazine, I'm like, wow, there's so much else out there in the world that would be cool to contribute to, and I think that the military is one place that people can contribute, but there are so many other avenues to do that. And there's a part of me that would be excited to do something else after I am done. I love it now, and I don't know when I'll make that transition, but, I've been writing ideas in notebooks for years about starting something with women and strategy. And I think that, so I after my kind of lieutenant captain time when I became the war planner and strategist, I've had some cool jobs. I totally lucked out, luck and timing for everything. But people ask, how have you been successful as a planner and strategist? And I think a lot of it actually comes down to kind of skills women have inherently, and it's relationship building, multitasking, planning. We kind of are just at heart planners, when it comes to family stuff, or
a lot better than us.
Planning a meal, planning a vacation, a grocery list, a birthday party. I mean, that sounds very different than planning a wars, but it's really not. What are my resources? What am I trying to accomplish, and how do I do this? And I think that women are really good at that. And so I've had a little dream of getting women strategist veterans together with other government organizations. So people that have served in the intel community, served for USAID, State Department, and kind of coming up with this like high-powered tiger team of like 10 women that we can kind of fly around the world and go into countries that are recovering, after war. So you go into Afghanistan and we talk to women and men about strategy and planning and government formation and just doing it from a different lens. And a lot of that is built on relationships. And so hopefully I'll start that one day. We'll see.
That's really cool.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I think it needs that. And we, two things. First of all, I'm glad you've already started thinking about what you're going to do next. And I especially am happy that you're doing something that's continuing to serve others, because that's a common thing I've heard from many veterans is, including myself, during transition or after you initially get out, it's always like seeking the next thing and trying to figure it out. And, you're never going to find what was perfect in the military. You're never going to find exactly what you're missing after you take your uniform off. But that desire to serve other people or serve a community or serve an organization, whatever it is, I think that's what's created a lot of veterans to be successful when they do take off their uniform. And so it's really cool to hear that you're doing that. And then to hear how you're looking at serving, I think that's an incredible, noble, powerful, and incredibly effective, especially somebody who comes with your background, that would have a lot of benefit to every nation that we've, the U.S. has connected to at all. And I've said this to multiple people, especially who were like trying to reflect on, especially the withdrawal from Afghanistan, is to remind Afghans that, look, this was a policy that had to be enacted. We had to withdraw, but that does not reflect our beliefs individually on what we believe of Afghans. Like we are still in support. Obviously, clearly a lot of veterans have stepped up and trying to get people out of the country still. But I think it's important to continue to share that message outside of the government.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people out there that want to contribute, not just in the military. I mean, look at Bo, and it's trying to find organizations that you can connect to. I think that, where I've seen people struggle the most, kind of what you're talking about, Dan, is in the transition period. So when we're war planning, we always talk about transitions are the most vulnerable time in between like a unit RIP, right? Or when a policy changes, something like that. That is when a unit is the most vulnerable. That's when something dangerous happens. And I think it's the actual transition period for veterans that is the most, that makes them the most vulnerable and kind of dangerous in some ways.
Yeah.
And I saw, my husband had an incredible career, and I saw him really struggle, the last couple of years until he really landed where he wanted to. My dad, I remember, it's no matter your rank, no matter how long you served, I think that it is always going to be very difficult to replicate how it feels to be in the military. Everything from routine to uniform to feeling part of something bigger to having, focus on a daily basis. All the stuff that we pretend we don't like when we're in it, we miss it when we're out, right? And I don't think it's necessarily finding something to replicate all of that. It's finding something to replicate the feeling that it gives you, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And that's why, I'm sorry, I'll let you say your piece in a second too. But that's why I talk about in the book, the third portion of what I talk about, because people talk about all the time, taking off your uniform, that transition, being away from the organization is such like an empty feeling, like you're trying to fill it with something. But that portion I feel like gets said all the time. And yes, you're right. You got to find the thing that's going to give you the same feeling. But in order to feel that, in order to understand what that feeling is, the third portion is that self-reflection and really looking at your service as in total, and understanding like what it meant to you, what it meant to your family, what it meant to your friends, and trying to find the things that are going to, again, you're not going to find a direct replication of it, but you can find something that's similar to it or that gives you the same sort of feelings. Mm-hmm. And that's why oftentimes service in some sort does fulfill a lot of those same feelings.
Yeah, it does. And I think it's, they try to, I feel like, push people into certain industries, right? You always see at the career fairs and everything, people getting pushed into like middle management for, some big corporation, or going into finance, or things that seem similar, but they're totally not. I mean, you would think to replicate a feeling of like what we do, you want to get more into kind of teaching, or something that connects you to others. So when you go home at night, I mean, and I think that the arts is lost, right? So I was talking to a girlfriend the other day, and she runs a big public relations firm for directors and the creative community. And she said they never get veterans kind of trying to come into those organizations. And there's so many veterans out there that would love that, that have artistic backgrounds, or were in drama, or arts. And I think that we need to just kind of open the aperture for industries or career fields that veterans can go into afterwards.
Yeah. I agree. And I was just going to highlight what you and Dan were just talking about, because I think this is an important topic before we wrap on, transition is I personally would love to see more veterans acting in Hollywood, or becoming like successful photographers, like myself, or like, selling their art or creating books. And I said it during the event that we were all at the National Veterans Memorial and Museum. And I've said it before on other podcasts, but it took me a while to figure this out. But I truly believe that when you start finding a way to help others through your passion is when you truly find success. And I think that goes with anything and with anybody. And I think that for veterans that are transitioning, find what you're passionate about, find what you love to do, find out how that can help others. And I think you're kind of like on the right path, but it's a grind.
Even things like, reporting and stuff like that. Like, I think there's some Dan Lamothe, or what, a reporter, I can't remember who he works for now, maybe the Washington Post or something, but he was a veteran. And when he writes articles, they're just different. They feel different. He kind of gets it, rather than kind of more of the punditry that comes from someone that's just a little bit disconnected. And veterans there's great writers out there. Like, why aren't they becoming the war correspondents or the reporters on TV, rather than someone that's trying to translate on their behalf, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's such an important thing. And, I talked about the politics, but I agree. All areas of our society should have a percentage of veterans involved.
Yeah.
I think it's 1% of our population is combat veterans from the GWAT, which doesn't seem like a lot. And it's correct. It's not that much, but it's actually more than a lot of people realize, I think. And if you had 1% of reporters being veterans, or 1% of photographers being veterans, or 1% of Hollywood actors being veterans, I think you would see a completely different society. And I don't know if it would be, better or more united or whatever it is, but just to have a completely different, more world view brought to the workplace. And I think that's an important thing. And not to mention the leadership, the drive, the work ethic, the teamwork ability, all those things that veterans bring to the table. And I would love to see more veterans step up and get outside of the traditional roles, like you said, those, middle management or finance, or starting up shirt companies, or
do something like different. And I forget who, I'm going to butcher this, but recently, and Katie, you might have heard it, maybe if you guys did the tour through the museum, or maybe not, but Bill Butler and Andy, who, worked together and helped run that museum along with General Ferreter, I've heard them a couple times say that, either they had like all of us kind of raise our hand, they'd ask 3 questions. It would be, who here is a veteran? Some people would raise their hand. Who here like knows a veteran or has family that are veterans? And then another group of people would raise their hands. And then the third one was, who here like works with a veteran? Mm-hmm. By the time that third question comes around, everybody has raised their hand at least once. So I think that for a lot of people listening, you're much more connected to veterans than you think you are.
Yeah.
And even though it's only 1%, I think all of us have a connection to veterans, or we should all strive to find a way to integrate them more into our society. Like what you said, Dan, with 1% being actors, 1% being into photography, 1% being chefs, whatever, like finding more opportunities to integrate them into society and help them transition, I feel like is what we should really be striving for.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and talking about it as well, I think that, there's the thank you for your service thing, but I always appreciate when, people take the next step, right? So I'm running the grocery store on the way home. I'm still in my uniform. You have one guy say thank you for your service, but then the cashier is like, oh, my, great uncle served in World War II. Did you know him? But it's just, when you kind of start telling stories about that, and it makes the veteran feel connected. It makes that person feel connection. I mean, I think everyone at heart is just looking for a human connection. And if, a veteran is what brings people together, that's a beautiful thing, And so instead of just saying, thank you for your service, ask that follow-up question, and inevitably you'll find something in common. And I think that's kind of what we need to do as a society.
Well, what you just said is so important. We all want to feel connected. Like, I don't care if you're a veteran or you're a civilian. It's just human nature that we all want to feel connected. And even with people that are just like, I love to be independent, I don't care about people, I want to go live off the land. There's still something about being around another human being that you relate to or that you can just conversate with. Mm-hmm. And I feel like with that said, we need to do that next step forward of just, besides thanking people for their service, is it's kind of like, where are you working right now? What do you do for a living? Find out who they are as a person. And maybe if we can help employ more veterans or we can help connect them more, I think that that'll help bridge that gap between the two different societies of being a civilian and being a veteran.
Well, and that's a perfect point about why we talk about this book, why we do this podcast, all those different things, because I think, especially the last, 10 years of this war, I feel like the veteran has been stereotyped, and we talk about this all the time. Mm. And the veteran has been kind of pushed into these certain categories, and it's very defined of like heavy PTSD or, Captain America, or we talk about the bro vet. We talk about, those typical categories. But veterans, to our beginning of this conversation, are an excellent representation of America. They come from all different backgrounds. They do all different things. They have all different sets of beliefs and understandings of the world. And we've all served in different areas of the world. We've all had a different military experience. So to try and categorize veterans is really doing everybody a disservice. And so I agree. I think it needs to be, when somebody tells me, thank you for your service, I typically respond with, it was my honor to serve. Mm-hmm. And because it was my choice. I decided to serve. So I appreciate somebody saying thank you for your service, but at the same time, it was my honor to serve, the country. Yeah. And that's everybody in the country. It doesn't matter if I agree with them or not. And I think if more people had that perspective, then you would see more unity. You would see more conversations. You would see more veterans coming out and telling their story and things like that. I didn't tell you about this yesterday, but this is a perfect opportunity to talk about it. Somebody messaged me on my Instagram last night, and he came to the event. He was not in the book, but he came to the event at the museum, and he just basically thanked me, but he told me more or less his entire story. But the biggest thing that he took away from it was like, prior to that event, I would have never told anybody my story.
That's crazy.
And he was like, you inspired me, talk to my family, talk to my friends, things like that, and just tell them like the struggles I've been going through in transition and all that kind of stuff. And he was like, it's opened me up to realize what has been my struggle, like why I have been struggling. Mm-hmm. And I think that's, again, going back to the transition a little bit, but I think that's the important part, is like more veterans need to step up. They need to tell their story. More people who are not veterans need to be open to having conversations with veterans and service members.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that was going to be my last point. And it's also to kind of flip that on its head. I think it's important that veterans talk to others about their story too, right? It's not a one-way thing. Like, we joined the military to protect our nation, right? And that's protecting our citizens. So it's important that we know who we're protecting. And so I think a lot of times people get out and they're friends with other veterans, and they tell their stories, and it's a little bit of an echo chamber. And not that they're elite by any means or trying to be standoffish, but I think it's a little bit of a laziness factor, and not wanting to kind of talk about themselves, but find out who the people are that we did go to war to defend, right? I mean, it's just because someone didn't join the military doesn't mean that they don't want to be, active members of society. And so I always have to remind myself of that. Like, I'm not better because I signed up. Maybe they wanted to be a doctor. Maybe they wanted to be, pick a career. Yeah. And that's good. We need all of those people. And I think that if we understand who we are defending, that brings us together as well.
I get why some veterans do it, but like you said, I think it's a little bit of laziness, but also pride. And I think that what it comes down to is, I think that, when they get out, they're kind of like, these people are never going to understand me, so I'm not even going to bother to waste my time to tell my story. But you're you're like pigeonholing yourself to never grow, to never get past what you experienced in your military career prior to that. So it's kind of like, I get that there's a lot of civilians that won't ever understand you. But at the same time, if we're all trying to change that narrative and help civilians understand you, we need veterans to come forth and be open with sharing their story and having that conversation, to be the first ones putting that foot in the door, because that's not only going to help you grow to obviously get those words out of your head and make them loud and make them known to people around you. But I think that's going to help you grow, and it's going to help people around you understand you more.
Well, and to flip it around the other way, a lot of civilians don't understand veterans. They don't know how to have those conversations. And, we've talked about multiple times, and some of the folks in the book about their experiences trying to have conversations. And they're like, if you see blood, are you going to freak out on me? Like, are you going to shoot up this place? Like, those dumb, ignorant comments. And it's horrifying. And I get why veterans don't want to share their story, because that's the other side of it. They won't understand. They won't get it. But, unless you put it out there and you say, hey, if you ever want to ask me about my service, feel free. Then people aren't going to know how to, but they're just not going to ask. They're going to be like, oh, it's cool you serve, but that's it,
Yeah, this goes back to kind of Bo's point about, 1% of actors being veterans in Hollywood, or directors, or people that are in the creative space that we all kind of base our perceptions off of, right? So, post World War II, everyone had been in the military, right? And so the characters on Mad Men were all veterans. I mean, you look at this, and it was just, that was a normal part of writing it into a script. And now it's like either a war movie, a movie about a veteran who's shot up the place because he's upset, or it's just sad, right? And I think if there was more just normalcy. So on a sitcom, the guy's now a teacher or whatever, but he's joking with his friends about their deployment to Iraq, just putting it into the narrative in a normal way. Right, not like a sensationalized way, I think is really important.
The problem is on both sides is we're hitting a wall. I don't know. There needs to be a massive PSA that goes on every television, every phone, that's like, hey, real quick, listen, don't ask veterans if they've killed people. Don't ask veterans if they see blood, if they're going to freak out. Like, I don't know. Like, you really need to teach some of these, I agree, dumb people not to ask so illiterate questions. But I understand that they don't. That's the thing. And they don't understand how to go about, and there needs to be. Well, they only know, to Katie's point, they only know what they've seen. Right? Yeah, true. So there needs to be, in these big productions, whether it's a TV show, movie, or some other books, whatever it is, there needs to be that side of it to understand. Like, it could be easily written into a sitcom. It'd actually be kind of funny if, you walk into a room, go to a boss or something like that, and they're like, hey, you going to shoot up the place? And it's like a veteran just stares at him and gives him like a sideways stare or something. That'd kind of be a comedic, but also like very real moment. Maybe we'll create that next.
Yeah. But
there you go. That's your next project. All Hollywood.
Yeah. But yeah, I think all these things are excellent points, and I'm glad we're having these conversations, because I think they need to be had more often. And, somebody who's had an extensive military career, and,
Mm-hmm.
We didn't even really talk about it, but I'm kind of glad we didn't, honestly, to a certain extent, is like you being a female at, the highest level strategic planner for our military is such what should be a huge accomplishment, but it shouldn't be an accomplishment because you're a female. It's an accomplishment because you're an incredible person.
Yeah, that's a damn big deal.
Yeah. And I actually read your article that you were quoted in. I don't remember who wrote it. But I think it was Military Times for the event you were at. I don't know if it was last week or the week before.
Oh, right, a couple weeks ago.
Yeah. But I think it's incredibly powerful for you to show that you're just a great human, and it doesn't matter. And I think that's what needs to come from veterans, from service members, from really just to reshape society, from there being these factions and separated groups, to just say, I just do good work because I'm a good person.
Yeah.
And that's
Amen.
all it is.
Amen.
Well, I want to, Katie, thank you for taking time. Obviously, we're recording this on a Saturday before we air it next week, but I just want to thank you for taking time away from your family, for coming on. For everybody listening, obviously, we took a week off because we released our book at the National Veterans Memorial Museum. Katie, who's our host on this episode, was there with her husband, and we can't thank you enough for supporting the book, for you and your sister being in it. And for, we announced it recently, but for those that don't know, the book is available now, but coming up next year, we are turning the book into an actual art exhibit at the same museum. So in Columbus, Ohio, Katie and her sister, their portrait will be on full display, giant artworks printed and framed. And
oh God!
As like as a walkthrough. So anybody who wants to see that mean mug face, it's going to be on full display.
Make me look really skinny.
Yeah, but it's cool to have that, to turn this book into an actual art exhibit that's going to be in the museum for 6 months, and then it's going to travel around the United States to different military museums and different places throughout the United States. We'll definitely tell our viewers and listeners more as time comes, but I just want to share that because, one, I want to explain to people why we missed an episode last week, but also I think it's important to share that you and your sister's story is going to be on full display, not only in the book, but as an artwork in the museum.
Wow.
Yeah.
Thank you both so much. I mean, you guys are hugely inspirational to me. My sister and I are proud to be part of the book for sure. And I'm just honored to talk to you guys. I learn something from you all the time. And I think these conversations with, Bo being a photographer, Dan being a veteran, and now doing this, me being active duty, I mean, this is what we need to do going forward, and just keep this going.
Absolutely. And if there's ever anything that we can help with you guys and your family, we're obviously here to keep that conversation going. And again, we thank you for taking the time to be on our podcast and just for all the help you've done so far with the book and everything else.
Oh, thanks so much. You guys are the best. Really.
All right. Thank you.
Great Saturday.